I am Eve, 25, raised within the closed walls of the Providence cult, where every breath was dictated by another. Today was meant to be my day of honor, becoming wife to Josiah, the supreme leader's son. We were taught it was a girl's most sacred dream, but right at the altar, before all the followers, he ripped my veil and roared, I was unclean. Not a wedding, but a death sentence. I was condemned to the rite of penance, a public torture where the condemned soul is crushed for the crowd's pleasure. I looked around, hoping for a saving hand, but was met only with icy stares, eager to see me break. They did not know, amidst the humiliation, a small note was secretly passed into my hand, an escape, a sliver of hope. To live, I had to feign submission. For revenge, I had to turn today's shame into a perfect performance. From that moment, I swore, Providence's blood and tears would be repaid many times over. The dust of Providence tasted like faith. It was a fine, red grit that settled on everything. The window sills of our identical stone houses, the pages of the one true book, and the back of my throat. For 25 years, I had breathed it in, lived by its rhythms. The sun rising over the flat-topped mesas was the eye of the Creator, the harsh wind his holy breath. Here, inside the high walls of our compound, the world was pure. Outside, beyond the horizon that shimmered with heat and doubt, was the corrupted world, a place of sin we were taught to fear and pity. My name is Eve, and tomorrow I was to be bound to Prophet Josiah, the son of our leader, Prophet Gideon. It was considered the greatest honor a woman in Providence could receive. I would become part of the sacred bloodline, mother to the next generation of prophets. Every girl I grew up with dreamed of this. They looked at me with a mixture of envy and reverence. I was supposed to be floating on a cloud of pious joy. Instead, my stomach was a knot of cold dread. Josiah was handsome in the way a desert hawk is handsome, all sharp angles and predatory grace. He moved with an unnerving confidence, his eyes holding a certainty that bordered on cruelty. He believed he was a divine gift, and he expected me to treat him as such. You should feel the Creator's light shining upon you, Eve, he'd told me last week, his fingers gripping my arm just a little too tightly. We were standing near the workshops, where the children, some as young as 7, spent their afternoons polishing stones and weaving baskets for trade with the outside. To be chosen by me is to be chosen by him. I had simply nodded, lowering my eyes as a good daughter of Providence should. I am blessed, Josiah. But the words felt like ash in my mouth. The source of my dread, the secret I held like a burning coal in my heart, was hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my small room. It was twofold: a slim, solar-powered cellular phone and a book. Not the one true book, but a book with a worn blue cover, its pages filled with stories of a world I couldn't imagine. They were a gift from Martha. Old, quiet Martha, who worked in the kitchens and whose eyes held a permanent storm of grief. Her daughter, Hannah, had died 3 years ago from a fever the infirmary's herbal remedies couldn't break. Outside medicine was forbidden, a corrupting influence. Martha had begged matriarch Alara, Josiah's mother and the true power in Providence, to make an exception. The matriarch had refused, calling it a test of faith. Hannah died, and a part of Martha died with her. 2 months ago, she had cornered me behind the laundry house, her hands trembling as she pressed a small, heavy package into my own. They took my Hannah, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. They will not take you. Your sister Lee, she got this to me. For you, Lee, my sister. The name was a wound that had never healed. She had escaped 10 years ago, vanishing into the night like a ghost, leaving behind a note that branded her a traitor. My parents were shamed, our family's status forever diminished until Josiah's holy gaze had fallen upon me. I had been taught to hate her, to pray for her lost soul, but in the dark of night I only missed her. The phone was my link to her. The book was her message. It was filled with poems and short stories from the corrupted world. Words that spoke of love, rebellion, justice, and sorrow in ways that the one true book never did. I read them by the faint glow of the phone's screen, my heart pounding with a terrifying mix of guilt and exhilaration. The first time I called Lee, my hands shook so badly I could barely press the numbers. A voice, familiar yet strange, answered on the second ring. "Who is this?" she asked, her tone sharp, professional. "Lee," I whispered, my voice cracking. It's Eve." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a choked sob. "Eve, oh God, is that you? How are you calling me?" "Martha," I managed to say. She gave me a phone. "Listen to me," she said, her voice suddenly urgent, cutting through years of silence. "You can't stay there. They're planning your binding to Josiah. I know, I still have contacts. Eve, he's not a good man. None of them are. This is my home, Lee," I said, the old teachings rising up like a shield. "You don't understand." I understand perfectly, she snapped, and I could hear the pain in her voice. I understand that you're a prisoner. I'm a lawyer now, Eve. I help people. Let me help you. A lawyer. The word was alien, something from a forbidden world. We talked for only 5 minutes, a conversation that felt both impossibly long and tragically short. She begged me to find a way out. I promised I would call again. Now, on the eve of my binding, the book felt heavier than ever. I had been documenting things on the phone, as Lee had instructed, taking pictures of the children in the workshops, their small hands raw and calloused. Recording the hushed conversations I overheard about shipments and money that never seemed to circle back into the community. We lived in austerity while Prophet Gideon and his family lived in a large, 2-story house with luxuries we were told were sinful. I was teaching the youngest children that morning, their faces turned up to me with innocent trust. We were practicing our letters, drawing in the fine red dust on the floor of the schoolhouse. Samuel, Josiah's cousin and one of the few young men who spoke to me with kindness rather than ownership, stopped by the doorway. "Eve," he said, his eyes troubled. "Matriarch Alara wishes to see you, in her private garden." A cold finger of fear traced its way down my spine. The matriarch's garden was where she held her most delicate conversations. It was beautiful, a defiant splash of green in the endless red, but it felt like a cage. I found her pruning roses, her movements precise and unforgiving. She didn't look up as I approached. "Eve," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone. "Tomorrow is a great day for you, for all of us. You are a vessel for the future of Providence." "I am honored, matriarch," I murmured, my head bowed. She finally turned to face me, her eyes the same piercing blue as her son, searching my face. "Honor is a heavy burden. It requires absolute purity. A single crack in the vessel can spoil the contents entirely. You understand what I'm saying, don't you?" "Yes, matriarch." "I hope so," she said, turning back to her roses and snipping a perfect blood-red bloom, "because cracks have a way of showing themselves under pressure, and my son, he does not tolerate imperfection." The veiled threat hung in the air long after I was dismissed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I held the phone, my thumb hovering over Lee's number. I was too afraid to call. Instead, I read the book one last time, a poem about a bird with a broken wing that still dreamed of the sky. I must have fallen asleep with it in my hands, because I awoke with a start to the sound of the morning bell, the book lying open on my chest. I shoved it under the floorboards in a panic and prepared for my binding day. The ceremony was held in the Great Hall. The entire community gathered. The air was thick with the scent of desert sage and unquestioning devotion. I walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, my face covered by a thin veil. My destination was Josiah, standing beside his father at the front, his smile triumphant. But as I reached him, he didn't take my hand. Instead, his eyes were cold fire. Brother Thomas, the head of our security, stepped forward. In his hand, he held the blue book. My blood ran cold. Josiah let the silence stretch, letting every eye in the hall fix upon me. He ripped the veil from my face. "We are gathered to celebrate a sacred union," he began, his voice ringing with theatrical fury. "A union to ensure the purity of our people, but there is a contamination among us, a rot." He snatched the book from Brother Thomas and held it aloft for all to see. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "This filth was found in the room of the woman who was to be my bride," he roared. "She has been communing with the corrupted world. She has let its poison into her heart and into our sacred home." He threw the book to the floor at my feet. "She is unclean." The words hit me like a physical blow. Unclean, tainted. I looked around at the faces in the crowd, my neighbors, my friends, the children I taught. I saw shock, horror, and in some, a flicker of dark satisfaction. My parents wouldn't meet my eyes. I stood frozen, my world collapsing. Then Matriarch Alara stepped forward, her face a mask of sorrowful duty. "A great sin has been committed," she announced, her voice silencing the whispers. "And a great sin requires a great penance. Eve, you will not be bound today. Instead, you will be cleansed. Tonight, before all of Providence, you will undertake the ritual of penance." A collective shudder went through the hall. The ritual of penance hadn't been performed in a generation. It was a legend whispered among children to scare them into obedience, a ritual of ultimate humiliation designed to break the spirit completely. As I stood there, stripped of my honor and my future, I knew this was more than a punishment. It was a death sentence for the person I was, and I had no idea if I would survive it. Brother Thomas's grip was like iron on my upper arm as he escorted me from the Great Hall. The walk was a blur of hostile, silent faces. No one moved to help me. No one whispered a word of comfort. I was a disease, and they were all afraid of catching it. He didn't take me back to my room, the one I had just been cast out of. Instead, we went down a flight of stone steps beneath the kitchens, to a part of the compound I had only ever heard about in fearful whispers, the solitude cells. The air grew cold and damp, smelling of earth and despair. He unlocked a heavy wooden door and shoved me inside. The door boomed shut, the bolt sliding home with a sound of finality. I was plunged into near-total darkness. I stumbled forward, my hands outstretched, until I hit a rough stone wall. I slid down it, my simple white dress, my now ruined binding dress, scraping against the stone. I drew my knees to my chest and finally let the sobs come, not loud, wailing cries, but silent, racking shudders that tore through my body. How had they found it? The question hammered at my brain. I had been so careful. I replayed the morning in my mind, the panic of waking up, shoving the book under the loose floorboard. Had I not pushed it in far enough? Had someone been watching? My mind spun with paranoia. Had Martha betrayed me? No, her grief was too real, her hatred for the prophet's family too palpable. Then hours passed. A thin sliver of light from a high, barred window crept across the opposite wall, the only way I could mark the time. My throat was raw, my eyes burned. The initial storm of terror had subsided, leaving behind a cold, hard knot of fury. Fury at Josiah for his public cruelty, at the matriarch for her cold-blooded machinations, at the community for their sheep-like obedience, and at myself for believing, even for a moment, that I could find a sliver of freedom within these walls. Late in the afternoon, I heard the bolt scrape back. I scrambled to my feet, pressing myself into the corner. The door creaked open, and Samuel stood there, silhouetted against the light from the corridor. He held a tin cup of water and a small, hard piece of bread. "Eve," he whispered, his voice strained. He stepped inside, letting the door close most of the way. He wouldn't look at me. "Why are you here, Samuel?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Have you come to gloat too?" "No," he said, shaking his head. He held out the cup. "You need to drink." I hesitated, then took it. The water was stale, but I drank it greedily. "Who told them?" I asked, the question I'd been screaming internally for hours. "Was it you?" His head snapped up, and for the first time he met my eyes. The pain in them was genuine. "Never, Eve, I would never." He looked back toward the door as if expecting to be caught at any moment. It was Rachel. Rachel. My blood turned to ice. Rachel, who had been my friend since we were children. Rachel, who had helped me stitch my binding dress. Rachel, who had told me just last week how lucky I was. "Why?" The word was a breath. "She saw you this morning, through your window," Samuel explained, his voice barely audible. "She said you looked panicked. After you left for the schoolhouse, she went into your room. She found the book. She took it straight to the matriarch. But we were friends." Samuel gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "She wanted Josiah. She's wanted him for years. She saw her chance to get you out of the way. The matriarch promised her favor. Rachel will probably be the next one chosen for him." The betrayal was so complete, so mundane in its jealousy-fueled cruelty, that it left me breathless. It wasn't a grand conspiracy. It was the simple, ugly act of a girl who wanted what I had, and a system that encouraged such venomous competition. "You have to be strong tonight, Eve," Samuel whispered, his hand hovering near my shoulder before he drew it back. "The ritual, it's designed to break you, don't let it." He backed away toward the door. "I'm sorry, I wish I could do more." He was gone and I was alone again, but the landscape of my despair had changed. Now it had a face, Rachel's smiling, treacherous face. An hour or so later, the bolt slid back again. This time it was Matriarch Alara herself. She carried a small oil lamp which cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. She looked as serene and composed as she had in her garden. "I thought it best we speak," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the small space, "to ensure you understand the purpose of your cleansing." I remained silent, pressed against the wall. I would not give her the satisfaction of my fear. "You see this place, Eve, this compound? It is a delicate ecosystem. It requires careful tending. One weed, if allowed to grow, can choke out the entire garden." She set the lamp on the floor, the light illuminating the chilling calm in her eyes. "That book, the ideas it contains, they are a weed. Rebellion, discontent, individualism. These things have no place here. They are poisons that destroyed the corrupted world, and I will not allow them to touch Providence." "You're afraid," I said, the words surprising me as much as they did her. Her expression flickered for a barest second. "I am a guardian," she corrected, her voice turning sharp. "I protect our way of life. A life your sister abandoned and now seeks to destroy from the outside, using you as her weapon." "Lee just wanted me to be free," I spat. "Free." The matriarch laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "To be a slave to sin? To chaos? There is no freedom out there, child. only damnation. Here there is order, there is purpose, and tonight you will serve a great purpose. The community is restless. There have been whispers, doubts. Your public penance will remind them of the cost of straying from the path. It will unify them in their conviction. Your humiliation will be their salvation. She was a monster. A calm, rational, utterly convinced monster. She truly believed that my suffering was a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. Josiah will be watching, she continued, a cruel smile touching her lips. He needs to see your spirit broken. He needs to know that the woman he almost took as his bride has been reduced to nothing. Only then will the taint be truly purged. Pray for strength, Eve, you will need it. She picked up her lamp and swept out of the cell, leaving me in the suffocating darkness, her words ringing in my ears, reduced to nothing. That was her goal. I sank to the floor, the cold seeping into my bones. Despair washed over me deeper than before. She was right. How could I possibly stand against all of them? They would tear me apart, and they would call it holy. Some time later, a small bowl of thin gruel was pushed through a slot at the bottom of the door. It was my final meal before the ritual. I ignored it at first, my stomach churning. But then I saw it. Tucked under the rim of the bowl, nearly invisible in the gloom, was a tiny, tightly folded piece of cloth. My heart leaped. With trembling fingers, I worked it free. It was a scrap from one of the kitchen aprons. I unfolded it carefully. Inside, written in charcoal, was a message in Martha's shaky script. Tonight, the West Gate. During the cleansing, all eyes will be on you. The guards there will be distracted. I have bribed one. He will leave the gate unlocked for 5 minutes. Run, don't let them break you. For Hannah, I stared at the words until they blurred. Run. It was a single word, but it was a lifeline. It was a chance. A terrifying, impossible, razor-thin chance. The ritual was no longer just an execution of my spirit. It was a diversion. My public humiliation was now my only hope for escape. A new feeling began to burn through the cold despair. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to have in years. It wasn't rebellion. It was hope. A wild, dangerous, desperate hope. I would have to endure the worst night of my life. I would have to let them think they were winning, that they were breaking me. And in the heart of my deepest shame, I would have to find the strength to run toward a world I had only ever read about in a forbidden book. The bells for the cleansing began to toll as dusk bled across the sky, turning the red mesas to a deep, bruised purple. It was a slow, sonorous sound that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, a funeral dirge for the girl I used to be. Brother Thomas and another guard, a grim-faced man named Elias, came to my cell. They didn't speak. They simply unlocked the door and motioned for me to come out. My limbs were stiff and cold from the stone floor. As I stepped into the corridor, they flanked me, their presence a suffocating weight. We walked up the stairs and into the main square of the compound. The entire community was there, their faces pale and unreadable in the flickering torchlight. They formed a large circle, a silent, judging coliseum. In the center, a wooden platform had been erected, my stage of shame. Prophet Gideon stood on the platform, his arms outstretched, his long white robes making him look like an avenging angel. Beside him stood Josiah, his face a mask of righteous indignation, and matriarch Alara, her expression one of solemn gravity. I saw my parents in the crowd, their faces etched with a pain so deep it looked like a physical wound. My father stared at the ground. My mother clutched a prayer book, her lips moving silently. They would not save me, they could not. Brother Thomas pushed me forward, forcing me to climb the few steps onto the platform. I stumbled, my worn dress catching on a splintered board. A few titters rippled through the crowd. I stood before them all, feeling their collective gaze like 1,000 tiny needles. Behold. Prophet Gideon's voice boomed, amplified by the unnatural silence. A daughter of Providence who has strayed, a vessel that has allowed itself to be filled with the poisons of the corrupted world. He gestured to Josiah, who stepped forward. My son, who in his divine wisdom uncovered this treachery, was saved from a tainted union. He will now begin the cleansing. Josiah approached me, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying mix of power and contempt. Eve, he said, his voice deceptively soft, yet carrying to every corner of the square. You have sinned against the Creator and against your people. Do you confess your transgression? This was the first step, the public confession. I looked out at the faces, searching for something, anything. I saw Rachel, standing near the front, her expression a sickening blend of piety and triumph. I saw Samuel, his face pale, his jaw tight with helpless anger. And I saw Martha, standing near the back, almost hidden in the shadows. She gave me the barest, almost imperceptible nod. Run, the word echoed in my mind. I confess, I said, my voice a broken whisper. I made it sound as pathetic as I could, letting my shoulders slump, my head hang low. "Speak up," Josiah commanded. "Let the people hear your shame." I took a shuddering breath. "I confess," I said, louder this time. "I read a book from the outside. I allowed wicked thoughts into my mind." "And do you repent?" Matriarch Alara's voice cut through the air, sharp as glass. This was the critical part. I had to seem broken, utterly and completely broken. I forced tears to my eyes, channeling every ounce of real fear and despair I felt. I dropped to my knees on the rough wooden planks. "I repent," I sobbed, the sound torn from my throat. "I am unworthy. I am unclean. Please, please forgive me." A murmur of approval went through the crowd. This is what they wanted to see. A sinner brought low, begging for redemption. It affirmed their own righteousness. Josiah smiled, a predator's smile. "Your repentance must be proven," he declared. "Words are wind. Your actions will show the depth of your sorrow. You will now perform the walk of atonement." Brother Thomas and Elias stepped forward. Elias held a pair of heavy shears. My heart stopped. I knew what was coming. It was the part of the ritual whispered about in the darkest corners of my memory. They grabbed my arms, holding me fast while Josiah took the shears. He gathered my long, dark hair in his fist, the hair that had once been praised as my finest feature. "Vanity is the first sin," he intoned, and with a rough, sawing motion, he began to cut. Thick locks of my hair fell to the platform, scattering around my knees like dead things. The shears were dull, and they pulled and tore at my scalp. It was a violation so profound, so intimate, that it was worse than a blow. Each snip was a piece of me being taken away, discarded. The crowd watched in rapt silence. When he was done, my head felt strangely light and exposed. My hair was a ragged, uneven mess. "Now," Josiah said, his voice filled with satisfaction as he tossed the shears aside, "you will walk among your people, and they will remind you of your place." He gestured to the crowd. A path was cleared. Brother Thomas and Elias hauled me to my feet and pushed me down the steps. The walk of atonement had begun. I was to walk the perimeter of the circle, barefoot, while the community performed their part of the ritual. The first was an old man I barely knew. As I passed, he spat on the ground at my feet. "Filth," he hissed. Next came a group of women from the sewing circle. They didn't spit. They threw handfuls of the red dust at me, chanting, "Cleanse her of sin, cleanse her of pride." The dust got in my eyes, my mouth, coating my tear-streaked face in a gritty mask. I kept my head down, my body trembling, playing the part of the broken sinner. But inside, a cold, hard core of resolve was forming. Every insult, every handful of dirt was fuel. They thought they were destroying me, but they were forging me into something new, something hard and sharp. I passed Rachel. She didn't throw dust. She simply looked at me, her eyes cold and empty, and whispered, "You brought this on yourself." The walk felt endless. The west gate was on the far side of the square from the platform. I had to survive this entire circuit. I had to keep them convinced of my submission. The children, the ones I had taught, were pushed forward by their parents. Some looked confused, others frightened. A small boy named Caleb, my favorite student, looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. His mother forced a pebble into his hand and made him throw it. It bounced harmlessly off my skirt, but it felt like a boulder hitting my heart. That was the moment I almost broke. The sight of that child's corrupted innocence was a pain sharper than the shears. But then I saw Martha again, her face a rigid mask, her eyes burning with an intensity that willed me forward. For Hannah, I was halfway around the circle now. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on me, but Martha's note was a secret shield. The guards at the west gate were visible now, 2 men I recognized. One of them, Daniel, was young and known for being easily swayed. He was likely the one Martha had bribed. They were watching the spectacle, their backs mostly to the gate. It was just as she had predicted. All eyes were on me. I neared the end of the circle, my body aching, my spirit screaming. I was just a few yards from the platform where I would have to kneel again for the final denunciation. This was it. This was my moment. The plan was insane. The gate was a good 50 yards from the circle. I would have to run across open ground. But the darkness on the edge of the torchlight was deep. If I could just make it to the shadows, I took my final steps, my fake sobs growing louder, more desperate. I stumbled as if my legs could no longer hold me. I fell to my knees a few feet from the platform, facing away from the prophet's family and toward the west gate. It was the perfect position. "I am broken," I cried out, my voice carrying in the silent square. I bowed my head, my forehead touching the dusty ground, the ultimate posture of submission, but my eyes were open. They were fixed on the sliver of deep blackness between the torches and the wall. I gathered my legs under me, my muscles coiling like a spring. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat counting down the seconds. 5 minutes, Martha had written. How much time had passed? Prophet Gideon raised his arms for the final prayer of condemnation. Let this broken vessel be a lesson to us all, that was my cue. While every head was bowed in prayer, every eye closed in pious judgment, I exploded from the ground. I didn't scream. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran with a desperation I had never known, my bare feet pounding against the hard-packed earth. For the first few seconds, no one reacted. The shock was too great. The girl who had been sobbing on the ground in total submission was now sprinting toward the forbidden wall. The first shout was one of confusion, not alarm. It came from Brother Thomas, a sharp, questioning bark. Then another, this one from Josiah, filled with pure, undiluted rage. Seize her! The prayer ended abruptly in a chorus of shocked gasps. The spell of the ritual was broken, shattered by my defiance. I didn't dare look back. I pumped my arms, my lungs burning, my ragged, shorn hair flying. The 50 yards to the gate felt like a mile. The torchlight seemed to cling to me, exposing me, but the shadows were getting closer. Behind me, the compound erupted into chaos. I could hear Josiah roaring orders, the sound of heavy boots pounding the earth as the guards gave chase. But they had been in the center of the square, and I had a head start. The crowd, a moment ago a unified wall of judgment, was now a confused, scattering mob, inadvertently creating obstacles for my pursuers. I reached the deeper shadows near the wall, the darkness swallowing me. It offered a precious second of concealment. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The guards were closing in, their figures silhouetted against the torches, but they were still 20 yards back. Josiah was with them, his face contorted in a mask of fury. I found the west gate. My heart hammered in my chest. Was it unlocked? I pushed against the heavy iron bars. For a terrifying second, it didn't move. Panic seized me. Had Martha been wrong? Had the guard betrayed her? I threw my entire weight against it, and this time, with a low groan of protest, it swung inward. It was open. I slipped through the gap and didn't stop to close it. Every second counted. I was outside. For the first time in my life, I was truly outside the walls of Providence. The air tasted different, cooler, laced with the scent of wild sage and freedom. The landscape was a terrifying expanse of blackness, the mesas hulking shapes against a sky riddled with more stars than I had ever imagined. There was no path, only rock-strewn desert. I ran, my bare feet screaming in protest as they met sharp stones and thorny brush. Behind me, I could hear shouts from the gate. They knew I was out. Torches were moving, fanning out. A hunting party. Lee's instructions, drilled into me over our whispered phone calls, came flooding back. Don't follow the road. They'll expect that. Head northwest toward the Three Sisters mesas. There's a dry riverbed about a mile from the compound. Follow it. It will give you cover. I forced my legs to move faster, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The adrenaline was a fire in my veins, overriding the pain in my feet. I scrambled up a small rise, the loose scree sliding under me. The sounds of pursuit were growing fainter, but I knew they wouldn't give up easily. I was not just an escapee. I was a symbol of their failure, a crack in their perfect world. After what felt like an eternity, I found it, the arroyo, the dry riverbed Lee had described. It was a deep scar in the earth, its sandy bottom and high, crumbling banks offering concealment. I slid down the bank, landing in the soft sand, and paused for a moment to listen. I could see the distant, flickering lights of the torches moving along the ridge above, but they were heading more to the west, toward the main dirt road. Lee had been right. They expected me to take the easier path. I began to run again, this time along the winding course of the arroyo. The sand was difficult to run in, but the cover was invaluable. The moon, a pale sliver, provided just enough light to see by. I ran until my lungs felt like they would burst, until my legs were numb with exhaustion. I have no idea how long I ran for, an hour, maybe 2. Finally, my body gave out. I collapsed behind a large boulder, my chest heaving, my entire body trembling with exertion and shock. The silence of the desert was absolute. No bells, no chants, no judgmental whispers, just the whisper of the wind and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I was alone, truly and utterly alone, and I was terrified. I stayed hidden behind the rock, peering out into the vast, indifferent darkness. What now? Lee had given me a destination. There's a gas station on Route 89, about 15 miles northwest of Providence. It's called Coyote's Rest. I will be there. I will wait for you every night from midnight until dawn for a week. Don't give up, Eve, I'll be there. 15 miles, on foot, barefoot, through the desert at night. It seemed impossible. But the alternative, being dragged back to the compound, to face whatever punishment Josiah and the matriarch would devise for a failed escapee, was unthinkable. As I huddled there, shivering in the cold night air, I heard a sound. It was the crunch of footsteps on gravel coming from further up the riverbed. My blood ran cold. Had they found me? I pressed myself flat against the sand, trying to make myself invisible. The footsteps grew closer, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the sound of a running guard. A figure appeared, walking slowly around a bend in the arroyo. It was a woman, her form stooped and weary. In the faint moonlight, I recognized the familiar shawl. It was Martha. I almost cried out in relief but stopped myself. Was this a trick? Had she led them to me? She stopped a few feet away, peering into the darkness. "Eve," she called out, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Are you there, child?" I remained silent, my heart pounding. "I saw you run," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I left by the kitchens as soon as the chaos started. I followed the arroyo. I knew you'd be smart enough to take it." She took a step closer. "I'm not here to hurt you. I brought you these." She held something out. In her hands was a small bundle. I slowly, cautiously rose from my hiding place. Her face, when she saw me, was a mess of relief and sorrow. "Oh, child," she breathed, looking at my shorn hair and dirt-caked face. "What they did to you." She didn't waste time with pity. She thrust the bundle into my hands. "Here, quickly." Inside were a pair of sturdy-looking boots, Hannah's boots, I realized with a pang, a canteen of water, a chunk of hard cheese, and a compass. "Hannah was about your size," Martha said, her voice thick with unshed tears. She always dreamed of walking away in these. She looked at my bleeding feet and knelt down, helping me pull the boots on despite my protests. They were a little big, but they were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. "Why, Martha?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why are you doing this? You could be punished, or worse." She looked up at me, her old eyes shining with a fierce, defiant light. "They took my daughter's life. They told me it was the Creator's will. They let her die because of their pride. I will not let them take your spirit, too." She stood up, pulling her shawl tighter around her. "The compass points north. Route 89 is northwest. Keep the North Star on your right shoulder. It will guide you." "Come with me," I urged, grabbing her arm. "You can't go back there." She gently removed my hand. "I am too old to run, child, and my place is here with my Hannah's memory." She pressed a small, sharp object into my palm. It was a pocket knife. "The desert has dangers beyond the men who are hunting you. Be careful." She looked back the way she came. "I must go before I am missed. Go now, don't look back. Live a life for my Hannah, Eve. Live a life that is truly your own." She turned and walked away, disappearing back into the darkness of the arroyo, leaving me with the tools for survival and a debt I could never repay. I watched her go, a wave of profound gratitude and sorrow washing over me. Then I turned northwest, took a long drink of water, and began to walk. My escape was no longer a frantic flight. It was a pilgrimage. I was walking for myself, for Lee, and for a girl named Hannah who had dreamed of the sky. The desert at night was a living entity. The wind whispered secrets through the sagebrush, and the shadows played tricks on my exhausted mind. Every rustle of a tumbleweed, every distant cry of a coyote, sent a jolt of fear through me. Hannah's boots, though a godsend, felt heavy and unfamiliar on my bruised feet, and the 15-mile trek to Coyote's Rest stretched before me like an impossible sentence. I walked for hours, my world reduced to the simple, grueling rhythm of placing one foot in front of the other. I followed the arroyo until it grew shallow and disappeared, then used the compass and the stars as Martha had instructed. The cold was a physical presence, seeping through my thin dress. My shorn hair, which had felt so liberating in its defiance, now offered no protection against the biting wind. Sometime before dawn, my canteen ran dry. Thirst became my new tormentor, a raw, scratching sensation at the back of my throat. My pace slowed to a stumble. The landscape was a monotonous, rolling expanse of rock and scrub. I began to wonder if I was walking in circles, if Lee's gas station was just a phantom, a cruel joke my desperate mind had conjured. Just as the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, I saw it. Not the gas station itself, but a faint, man-made glow on the horizon. A light. It was followed by the low, distant rumble of a truck changing gears. A road. It had to be Route 89. The sight gave me a new surge of energy. I began to run, a clumsy, shuffling jog, my body screaming in protest. As I got closer, the details emerged from the pre-dawn gloom: 2 gas pumps, a squat single-story building with a flat roof, and a flickering neon sign that read Coyote's Rest, with the in rest blinking erratically. And parked beside the building, a dark sedan. My heart leaped into my throat. Was it her, or was it them? Had they somehow gotten ahead of me? I ducked behind a cluster of boulders, my body trembling, watching the car. A figure was in the driver's seat. I couldn't make out their features. I waited, my breath held for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the car door opened. A woman stepped out, stretching her arms. She was tall, wearing jeans and a jacket, clothes I had only ever seen in pictures. She had the same dark hair as me, but cut short, in a style that looked sharp and confident. She walked to the front of the car, leaned against the hood, and looked out into the desert, her gaze sweeping the horizon. It was Lee. Tears streamed down my face, hot and sudden. I stumbled out from behind the rocks, trying to call her name, but only a dry croak came out. But she saw me. Her head snapped in my direction. Her posture went rigid with shock. "Eve." She called out, her voice a mixture of disbelief and hope. I tried to run the last few yards, but my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the gravel. In a second, she was there, kneeling beside me, her arms wrapping around me. Her embrace was strong, real, grounding. "Oh God, Eve, you made it," she sobbed, her face buried in my ragged hair. I was so scared, I thought. "You're here," I whispered, clinging to her like a drowning person to a raft. "You're real." She helped me to my feet and supported me as we walked to her car. She opened the passenger door, eased me into the seat, and then went around to the trunk, returning with a bottle of water and a thick blanket. I drank the water in slow, careful sips, the cool liquid a blessing on my parched throat. She wrapped the blanket around my shoulders. "We need to go," she said, her voice now crisp and focused, the lawyer taking over. "They'll have the local sheriff looking for a runaway. We need to be across the state line before the sun is fully up." She got into the driver's seat, started the car, and pulled out onto the empty highway. The motion of the car was a strange, alien sensation. I watched the hostile desert I had just crossed recede in the rearview mirror, the neon sign of Coyote's Rest shrinking until it was just a pinprick of light. "Your hair," Lee said, her voice soft, her eyes flicking to me for a second before returning to the road. "What did they do to you?" "The ritual of penance," I said, the words tasting like poison. I told her everything, my voice low and monotonous with exhaustion, the public accusation, Rachel's betrayal, the shears, the walk of atonement. She listened in silence, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "They won't get away with this, Eve," she said finally, her voice dangerously calm. "I promise you that." I reached into the small pocket of my dress. My fingers closed around the only thing I had brought with me from that life, besides Martha's gifts. I pulled out the phone. The battery was dead. "There's proof on here," I said, holding it up. "Pictures, recordings, everything I could get." Lee's eyes widened. She pulled over to the shoulder of the empty road and took the phone from me, her expression one of awe. "Eve, this is more than I ever could have hoped for. This changes everything. This isn't just your word against theirs anymore. This is evidence." She pulled a portable charger from her glove compartment and plugged the phone in. As it powered on, I felt a profound sense of relief. My suffering had not been for nothing. My risk had a purpose. We drove for hours, crossing into Nevada as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The world outside the car window was a dizzying, overwhelming assault on the senses. Billboards with smiling faces selling things I didn't understand. Cars of every shape and color moving at incredible speeds. Buildings that scraped the sky. It was exactly as terrifying and wonderful as the Forbidden Book had described. We finally stopped in a small, anonymous town. Lee checked us into a motel, a single-story building with a faded sign. Inside the room, the first thing I did was look in the mirror. I barely recognized the person staring back. A thin, grimy face, haunted eyes, and the brutal, hacked-off hair. The girl from Providence was gone, and this stranger was left in her place. Lee ordered food from a local diner. While we waited, she sat with me on one of the beds. "I have so many questions, Lee," I said, my voice small. "Why did you leave? They told us they said you were a traitor." She sighed, a sound heavy with a decade of pain. "I was supposed to be bound to Brother Thomas. I was 17. He wasn't a kind man. I saw what happened to the women who were bound to men they feared. They just disappeared. They became empty shells. I couldn't do it. One night I just ran. I didn't know where I was going. I was lucky. A truck driver found me, gave me a ride to Salt Lake City. I lived in a shelter. I worked 3 jobs. I put myself through school, then law school. I did it all with one goal in mind, Eve, to get strong enough to come back for you. I hated you for leaving me," I confessed, the words tasting bitter. "I know," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "And I'm sorry. I was just a kid and I was so scared. Writing that note was the hardest thing I've ever done. I knew they'd use it against you, against our family, but I hoped one day you would understand." The food arrived, a hamburger and French fries. I had never seen such a thing. I ate it with a ravenous hunger, the flavors an explosion in my mouth. It tasted like another world. That night, as I lay in a real bed with soft sheets for the first time in my life, sleep wouldn't come. The room was too quiet, the darkness too complete without the familiar red glow of the desert seeping under the door. I was free, but I felt adrift, a ghost caught between two worlds. I had escaped the cage, but I had no idea how to fly. The next morning, Lee was all business. She had been up for hours, making calls, her laptop open on the small table. "Okay," she said, turning to me. "I've spoken with a colleague at the Department of Justice who specializes in cases like this. They're interested." "Very interested. The evidence on your phone, especially the recordings about the financial dealings and the photos of the child labor, is explosive. They're ready to open a federal investigation." "What does that mean?" "It means the FBI. It means we're not just going after them for what they did to you. We're going after the entire corrupt structure of Providence, for tax evasion, for conspiracy, for human trafficking." She took a deep breath. "But they're going to need a key witness, Eve. Someone to explain what's on the phone, someone to testify in front of a grand jury. That person has to be you." I stared at her, my mind reeling. Testify? Stand up in a room full of strangers and speak against Prophet Gideon, against Josiah, against the matriarch. The very idea sent a wave of paralyzing fear through me, the deep-seated, conditioned terror of a lifetime. "I can't," I whispered. "Lee, I can't face them again." "Eve, listen to me," she said, kneeling in front of me, her hands on my knees. "Look at me. You are the strongest person I know. You survived 25 years in that place. You endured a ritual designed to shatter you. You crossed a desert barefoot to save yourself. You can do this. You're not the broken girl they tried to create. You're a survivor. And your voice is the weapon that will bring their entire corrupt world crashing down." The weeks that followed were a surreal montage of firsts. The first time I wore jeans, the fabric feeling rough and wonderfully defiant against my skin. The first time I walked into a grocery store, a palace of overwhelming choice and vibrant color that left me dizzy. The first time I saw the ocean, a vast, breathing expanse of blue so much bigger than my imagination that it made me cry. Lee was my patient guide, my anchor in this chaotic new world. She taught me how to use a credit card, how to navigate a city bus, how to order a coffee. Each small act was a reclamation of the life that had been stolen from me. We moved into her small, sunlit apartment in California. It was filled with books, hundreds of them, lining the walls like a fortress of knowledge. For the first time, I could read whatever I wanted without fear. I devoured everything from history to fiction, each page a window into a world I was slowly, cautiously, beginning to join. But beneath the surface of this new life, the shadow of Providence loomed. My days were spent with Lee and a team of federal agents, meticulously going through the evidence on my phone. An agent named Mark, a kind but serious man with tired eyes, would sit with me for hours, asking questions. "Eve, can you identify the children in this photograph?" he'd ask, pointing to a grainy picture of the workshop. "That's Daniel, he's 7. That's Sarah, she's 9. Her hands were always bleeding from the weaving," I answer, my voice flat, trying to keep the emotion out. "And this recording," he'd play a hushed conversation I'd captured between Prophet Gideon and Brother Thomas. "The shipment to the contact in Arizona needs to be off the books. All cash. The matriarch has the ledgers. Can you explain what the shipment refers to?" Each session was like reopening a wound. I had to relive the fear, the oppression, the quiet moments of injustice I had witnessed my entire life. The nightmares came back, vivid and terrifying. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of the cleansing bell ringing in my ears, the feeling of Josiah's shears in my hair. The hardest part was preparing my testimony. Lee and the DOJ lawyers would stage mock cross-examinations, preparing me for the tactics the defense would use. "Isn't it true, Ms. Eve, that you were a disgruntled bride, scorned by a righteous man?" A lawyer playing the devil's advocate would sneer. "Isn't this all just an elaborate revenge fantasy? Isn't it a fact that you were influenced by your traitorous sister, who filled your head with lies about a community that had only ever shown you love and protection?" The first few times, I crumbled. The old programming, the ingrained guilt and self-doubt, would rise up and choke me. I would stammer, cry, unable to defend myself against the onslaught of accusations. "They're going to paint you as an unstable, vindictive liar, Eve," Lee told me after one particularly difficult session. "They will try to tear you down, to make the jury doubt everything you say. You can't let them. You have to find your anger." Find my anger. It was a strange concept. In Providence, anger in a woman was a sin, a sign of a rebellious spirit. But as I replayed the memories, not just of my own humiliation, but of Martha's grief, of the children's bleeding hands, of Hannah's needless death, a different kind of fire began to burn within me. It wasn't the hot, chaotic rage of Josiah. It was a cold, clear, focused anger. An anger born of righteous indignation. The day of the grand jury hearing arrived. It wasn't a public trial, but a closed session where a group of citizens would decide if there was enough evidence to formally indict the leaders of Providence. I walked into the federal courthouse, my hand clutching Lee's. I wore a simple, dark blue dress she had helped me pick out. My hair had started to grow back, and Lee had taken me to a salon where a kind woman had shaped it into a short, stylish cut. I looked like a stranger, but for the first time I felt like I was becoming myself. When I entered the hearing room, I saw them. Prophet Gideon, Matriarch Alara, and Josiah, all flanked by expensive-looking lawyers. They wore clothes from the outside, trying to look normal, civilized, but their eyes were the same. Gideon's held a look of wounded piety. Josiah's burned with pure hatred, and the matriarch, her gaze was the most chilling. It was cold, appraising, and held not a flicker of remorse. When I took the stand, my heart was a wild bird beating against my ribs, but I looked at them, at the architects of my lifelong prison, and I thought of Martha. I thought of Hannah. I thought of Caleb, the little boy forced to throw a stone at his teacher. And my anger solidified into resolve. I spoke for 3 hours. I told them everything. I described the system of control, the psychological manipulation, the exploitation masked as faith. I explained the financial schemes, the child labor, and I told them in a clear, unwavering voice about the ritual of penance. When I described Josiah cutting my hair, a female juror wiped a tear from her eye. When I spoke of the little boy, Caleb, an audible sigh of disgust went through the room. The defense attorney came at me, just as Lee had predicted. He was slick and aggressive. "Ms. Eve, you ask this jury to believe that you, a woman with no formal education, no understanding of finance, somehow uncovered a criminal conspiracy that no one else saw in 50 years. I met his gaze directly. I didn't need a formal education to see children with bleeding hands. I didn't need to understand finance to know it was wrong for one family to live in luxury while everyone else starved. And I didn't need a degree to know that what was done to me in the name of God was not holy. It was abuse. The room was silent. I could feel the shift. They weren't looking at me as a victim anymore. They were listening to me as a witness. I saw Josiah whisper something to his mother. The matriarch's serene mask finally cracked. She glared at me with an expression of such pure venom that it sent a shiver down my spine. In that moment, I knew I had won. My truth was more powerful than her control. The grand jury deliberated for less than a day. The indictments were sweeping: racketeering, tax fraud, conspiracy, and multiple counts of child labor and human trafficking against Gideon, Alara, and Josiah. Brother Thomas and several others were also indicted as co-conspirators. The raid on Providence happened at dawn a week later. It was all over the national news. Helicopter footage showed federal agents pouring through the West Gate, the same gate I had escaped through. They showed the workshops, the prophet's lavish house, and the faces of the community members blinking in the flashing lights, their world of absolute certainty shattered. One image stuck with me. It was a brief shot of Martha, standing by the kitchens, watching the agents lead the prophet's family away in handcuffs. She wasn't smiling. Her face was solemn, her expression unreadable. But I knew that in her heart, a quiet, long-overdue justice for her daughter had finally been served. Lee and I watched the news from her apartment. She put her arm around me. "You did it, Eve," she whispered. "You set them all free." But were they free? I wondered, watching the confused faces on the screen. Their cage was gone, but they had lived in it for so long. Like me, they would have to learn how to fly. It would be a long, difficult road for all of them, but now, at least, they had a chance. And that was more than they had before. That was everything. The fall of Providence was a national sensation, a week-long spectacle of headlines and cable news debates. But once the cameras left and the dust settled, the real, complicated work began. Social workers and counselors descended on the compound, now a federal transition center. They had to deprogram a community that had been systematically isolated from reality for generations. For many, the outside world was not a liberation but a terrifying chaos. Lee threw herself into the legal aftermath, helping to connect the former members with resources, ensuring their rights were protected. I stayed away from the compound, the memories still too raw. Instead, I found my own way to help. I began volunteering at a local community center, working with refugees and survivors of trafficking, people who, like me, were trying to build a new life from the ashes of an old one. I understood their disorientation, their fear of a world that didn't make sense. I enrolled in college. My first class was English literature. I sat in a lecture hall with 100 other students, and when the professor began discussing a poem about rebellion, I didn't have to hide my book. I could raise my hand, speak my thoughts, and disagree without fear. It was the most liberating feeling I had ever known. The trials of the Providence leadership were scheduled a year later. I was the prosecution's star witness. Walking into that public courtroom was the final test. This time, when I faced Josiah and his parents, I felt no fear. I felt a quiet, resolute pity. They looked smaller, diminished, stripped of their robes and their power. Their defense was a pathetic attempt to portray Providence as a peaceful, misunderstood religious group persecuted by the government, and me as a mentally unstable pawn manipulated by my sister. But the evidence was overwhelming. The ledgers, the photos, the recordings, and then there were the other voices. Spurred by my testimony, other former members began to come forward. A young man testified about being beaten for questioning the prophet. Several women spoke of the coercive nature of the bindings. And in the most powerful moment of the trial, Martha took the stand. She walked to the witness box with a slow, deliberate grace. In a voice that was quiet but unshakable, she told the story of Hannah. She described begging the matriarch for outside medicine, only to be told her daughter's life was a test of faith. The courtroom was utterly silent. When she was done, she looked directly at the matriarch and said, "You are not a prophet. You are just a cruel woman who let my daughter die." It was a judgment more damning than any the court could deliver. The guilty verdicts came as no surprise. Gideon, Elara, and Josiah received long federal prison sentences. Their corrupt empire had crumbled. 2 years after my escape, I sat with Lee on a bench overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The setting sun painted the water in strokes of gold and crimson. I had just finished my associate's degree and had been accepted into a 4-year university to study social work. "Do you ever miss it?" Lee asked, her voice soft. "Any part of it?" I thought for a moment, watching the waves crash against the shore. "I miss the quiet of the desert mornings," I admitted. "I miss the feeling of knowing everyone around you, even if that feeling was a lie. But I wouldn't trade a single day of this chaos to go back." I turned to her, a real smile on my face. "Thank you, Lee. You didn't just save my life, you gave me one." "You gave yourself one, Eve," she said, squeezing my hand. "I just unlocked the gate." A few months later, I received a letter. It was from Samuel, Josiah's cousin. After the raid, he had left Utah and was working on a ranch in Montana. He wrote that he was sorry for not doing more to help me, that my escape had forced him to see the truth he had been avoiding his whole life. He was one of the success stories. He was building a new life. He ended the letter by saying, "You were the bravest person I ever knew." I held onto that letter. Life unfolded. It was messy, beautiful, and completely my own. I fell in love with a kind man who loved my mind as much as my heart. I finished my degree and became a counselor, specializing in helping people leave high-control groups. I used my story, my pain, not as a source of shame, but as a source of strength and connection. I had a daughter. I named her Hannah. Sometimes, when I tuck my Hannah into bed at night and read her stories of brave girls and magical worlds, I think back to that girl in the solitude cell, huddled in the darkness. I think of the fear, the hopelessness. It feels like a lifetime ago, a story about someone else. My journey was never just about escaping a physical place. It was about escaping the prison of a mindset, the belief that my worth was defined by my obedience, that my voice didn't matter. The walls of Providence were high, but the highest walls are the ones we build in our own minds. To anyone who feels trapped, whether by walls you can see or walls you can't, know this: your spirit is more resilient than you can possibly imagine. There is a strength within you waiting for a reason to ignite. It might be a whispered word from a friend, a line in a forbidden book, or the memory of a love you lost. Find that spark, feed it, let it grow into a fire. Running away is the first step. Running towards something, towards knowledge, towards healing, towards a life of your own choosing, that is where true freedom is found. It is a long and difficult road, and you will stumble. But you are not alone. And the view from the other side is worth every single step. My name is Eve, and I am free.